So I got to ask you a question. Growing up, see, because Indiana kind of feels like a Mississippi up north to a degree. So, did you feel racial tension growing up in Indianapolis as a youth and a young man? Like, was that a part of your, or were you able to be embedded in your community? So only when you went outside of your community was it felt?
Well, Indianapolis has a uniqueness about it in that it's just right in the center of the state. So north of Indianapolis, you're moving towards Chicago, and there you have it. But then, of course, in the southern part, below Indianapolis, in southern Indiana, you're moving south toward Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and all of that.
Wow, I never even thought of it like that. That's very interesting.
So Indianapolis can be a hodgepodge of all these different kinds of people. So if you're in the black community in Indianapolis, there's still a similar mix. People who are very southern in their approach to life, and even sometimes in the inflections in their language, and then folk who are more northernly in the sound inflections in their language, and even in their ideas, because you remember the great migrations. A lot of folk were moving from the south to the north, Chicago and Detroit and all of those ways, because many were moving west, of course. So you had north of Indianapolis, you had people who were moving northernly and having a more northerly type approach and look at view of life. And south of Indianapolis, you had people who were more like Kentucky and Mississippi and Tennessee type people, and they were black and white. However, black people never had, I would say, the luxury to be that broad in their scope in life because of prejudice and racism. So if you lived in Indianapolis and you lived in a black community, you lived in a black community, period. However, the white folk were the police. And so the same dynamic existed then, and even worse, of course, as you can imagine, as exists today with the police, because they are, in my impression, I would say that they are the new, what do they call them, paddies, the slave catchers.
Yeah. And
the whole idea of police, I believe, to the level that it's grown into, where it came from, had to come out of ideas of control of slaves.
Question. So I live in Chicago, and what a lot of the major industry that black folk could get involved with here is steel mills, slaughterhouses, and roadway, the Pullmans, porters. In Indianapolis, what was the major industries for black folk to be involved?
Wow, that's an interesting question. It depends on the era and the course.
Like granddaddy's era.
And my father's era,
yeah.
Either dad worked construction sometimes, and because he often worked 2 jobs. And then as a construction worker, of course, you didn't have skills. You weren't working in the skills section. You were hod carrying. They called it hod carrying. They would dump concrete on these boards would have a handle on the bottom, and the man would hold the handle and put the board on his shoulder, and they put concrete on it, and he carried up ladders to people laying bricks.
Wow. Dangerous.
And hard work, because you're climbing that ladder with one hand.
Boy, if they was playing basketball back then, them brothers should be dunking. Or
whatever they would be doing, because you're carrying concrete on your shoulders up a ladder. That's what you do all day. You couldn't be no weak man. But we never have as black men. I'm not trying to get off. There's too much to that. That's not where it's going. We never had an option to be soft. There was always hard work from slavery, because they brought us here to work hard.
Manual labor.
And all they ever wanted to do was sit back and look at us and enjoy us working hard and sweating. So no, my father, of course, manual labor, and then he was also from high school. He majored in automotive.
Okay.
So on the side, he did automotive work, and at some point in his life, because he would have 2 and 3 jobs sometimes, feeding 11 people in a home. Well, him and my mother feeding 9 children, sometimes 10. That's another story. They worked very, very hard. They worked a lot of hours, and so that made the older of us, the older 3, did the chores. I was being the oldest son. I was like I don't want to say father figure because I wasn't, but I would say disciplinarian.
Yeah, responsible.
I was responsible. Stuff get broke. I was the one calling in.
Right.
If the smaller kids did something that was punishable, I would be the one that would get punished. Of course, for allowing it, for not watching over them.
The overseer. You were actually what I named overseer.
I was an overseer, and I'm parents for the slave drivers, so they had to whip. Although sometimes it was a switch.
It's funny you said that. One time, I only got a whooping from Granddaddy one time, and that's because I was hanging with my cousins, Sammy, L.A., Scott, and we was all playing in Granddaddy garden in that back area. And,
oh, my.
And he whooped all of us together.
Yeah. That was dreadful. I know what he was thinking. He's out there sweating and digging and planting and worrying about his stuff coming up so he can feed these 9 children. And y'all out there doing what? Tearing up his vegetables. People in general at that time, they were not foolish people. Because they came up in a more severe time, post-slavery periods, prejudice, and denial of position and work, and glass ceilings, all of that stuff that held Black people down and on purpose, and that was planned by the government, even by bureaucracy, planned degradations, planned to hold you in a certain place so they could continue to use you as a slave. To have parents like mine that made a way. My father also had 3 businesses, and he still worked every day. My mother had those businesses, 3 restaurants, but she also worked occasionally. When that restaurant wasn't doing very well, wasn't getting a whole lot of people in, then she would do both. She would be in the restaurant at the busiest times when she would make her best money, then she would be doing something else at night. They were hard workers, and I never really heard either one of them complain. I think everybody was complaining, it would have been the kids, because we saw a toy on TV and we wanted one. They both were always working, always doing something. And of course they had in their mind, not only in their heart, not only the thing that they felt put here to do and felt the ability to do. They didn't like sit on their hands when they thought they could do something. And it wasn't like always on some grand level scale, and wasn't always something that was going to get them a lot of accolades from people, but it was always something that was moving their family forward. It's always something putting bread on the table. And even though, because they were so hard, we didn't, as the kids in the family, we may have not gotten some of the attention that we wanted to get. At the same time, because love is work. Love in itself is a verb. I mean, and so
action word.
So their action was feeding us, clothing us, and then when they could sit down with us and talk with us, they had sensible things to say. They had edifying things to say. And when they had to discipline us, they did so in a way that it was remembered. We would get the point.
Yes, sir.
I think, that's just my opinion, I think we became, as a people, softer. we became softer because we were tired of that. You can imagine we were working and picking cotton and potatoes, and our backs were bent over all the time, and we worked really hard for very little. And so that had, because the kids were out there in that field working too. And by the time they could move up out of the South and move north during the Great Migration, as you know about, they were still hustling in factories and slaughterhouses and in people's homes. And they still had to work really hard. We still don't control anything. And I'm surprised by that because as a younger man, I envisioned a time when Black people would have a larger portion of the American economics, the dollar bill, and would naturally realize that because of the life and history of Black people, that we would be smarter and do things more for the culture. Well, that has not turned out to be true. And so the only thing that Black dollar has done was created more separation between Black people.